Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our finale on the Sega Saturn series. We had to move the date slightly so we could get to some horror games for October on Tuesdays, but we're going to wrap everything we talked about the Saturn up today and tell you guys whether or not we think you should pick one up. Before we get too far involved, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell. It takes a lot of time and energy to make each one of these episodes and we appreciate your guys' support. But the Sega Saturn is one of my favorite consoles of all time and I absolutely love collecting for it. Even if its reputation in North America is of a failed console compared to the Nintendo 64 and especially the PlayStation 1, there are a ton of exclusive games to the Saturn that are 100% worth picking a console up for and collecting. It's got some amazing experiences that you may never have played before, and the controller is absolute perfection. I love this thing. I would play every game on it if it was possible. The Saturn, the design, the games for it, everything about it just makes me love the console. But like I said, in North America, it doesn't have a great reputation, and the North American cases are terrible and break all the time. But there's a ton of exclusive games to Japan, like Castlevania Nocturne in the Moonlight, the version of Symphony of the Night just for the Saturn, and some of the games are expensive, but there's a lot of cheap things you can play on the console. But just recapping what we talked about during the season, Burning Rangers is one of my favorite games on the platform. It's awesome, it's unique, and it does something different than a lot of other 3D action platform games are doing back then, and I can't recommend that one enough. But when you think about the Saturn, I always think about Nights into Dreams. We expected a traditional Sonic game for the console, and we never really got that. But Yuji Naka and Sega made Nights instead, and it's an awesome experience. If you've never played it, it is quite cheap, and you definitely should check it out. Now, as far as Bomberman games are concerned, Saturn Bomberman is probably the best 2D Bomberman game ever made. It is just perfection. And if you play as like a party game with a bunch of friends, it is a ton of fun. And you also get things like Die Hard Arcade, which is an awesome beat-em-up. It's a really weird game that doesn't really have anything to do with the movie, but it's a really fun pick-up-and-play arcade experience, and Saturn has a ton of those, and they can be found relatively cheaply still. And that's the thing with Saturn games, is they are going up in price a lot. So if you want to play something like Deep Fear, which is basically a Resident Evil clone, except it is quite good, it might be time to start thinking about picking a Saturn up now because the prices are just going crazy on the platform. And things like Virtual Fighter 2, outside of getting the arcade PCB to play in your house, this is an awesome version of the game. And if you're into 3D fighting games, or if you're into Virtual Fighter and you haven't played the earlier entries, you definitely have to, because Sega loved bringing over Model 2 arcade games to the Saturn, and they didn't really bring them over to the Dreamcast based on the timing. So something like Virtual On is still really good on the Saturn. The graphics might not be as good as the Model 2, but you can still pick these games up and enjoy them. And then things like Guardian Heroes, exclusive to the Saturn. There's a remake for Xbox 360 on the arcade. I don't like it as much because I feel like the control lags a little bit, but it's on the Saturn and it is amazing. And then if you're a huge fan of Castlevania, you have to check out Nocturne in the Moonlight because it's everything that you got on the PlayStation, except there's extra levels. You can play as Maria from the start. It just has a ton more content. So for me, as a huge fan of this game, I have to have it. And then things like Sega Rally, again, another Model 2 game that was ported to the Saturn, and Sega did a great job of porting a lot of these games over. But the games that we did cover, there were so many that I could have put in, and I had a really long list, but Vampire Savior, The Lord of Vampire from Capcom is a stunning 2D game, and this is going to use the 4MB RAM expansion, and this allowed for visuals and play that was not possible on the PlayStation 1 because it didn't have the RAM. So if you're a huge fan of Capcom 2D fighting games and you want to collect them, the Sega Saturn is definitely going to be your platform of choice, because I can't say enough good things about the Vampire Savior series, but there's so many other entries from Capcom on the Saturn that are amazing to play. And I really did want to cover this game in the season, but for some reason when I do fighting games, I don't really get that many views on them. It's a really hard genre to cover unless you're extremely good at the games. And that's the fun thing about the Saturn, is it is expandable. Just like the Nintendo 64, you get these 4MB RAM expansions, and some games require them, and that's why they play and look so much better on the Saturn versus PlayStation 1. And then the system does some really unique and weird things like Clockwork Knight. It's a really fun and really strange 2.5D platformer. It doesn't make any sense, it's kind of actually creepy, but the Saturn is home to a bunch of experiences that you haven't seen if you only collected for PlayStation 1 or Nintendo 64. Something like this, Bug 2. There's a lot of weird and quirky games on the Saturn, especially if you start importing Japanese games, and it just gives you something extra to collect for from this generation. Because I love the Nintendo 64, I love the PlayStation 1, I love the Saturn, but the Saturn has such a great and deep library of games that were never available anywhere else. If you've had enough of collecting for PlayStation 1, or you're not interested in picking up any more Nintendo 64 games right now, and you're just looking for something new and unique to collect for, 100% go out and buy a Saturn. You're not going to go wrong with it. And I do recommend you start sooner rather than later, because in the last probably 12 to 18 months, Saturn collecting and prices have gone really high, and they're probably going to continue to do so. So it's not the best time to jump in, but you can still get a console between $100 to $150, maybe a little cheaper if you're on a forum. Some things that are exclusive to the Saturn, like Nocturne in the Moonlight, that's going to cost like $175, and I paid $40 for it years ago. But what you need to do is look at Japanese releases, because Virtual On for the Saturn as a Japanese release is $15. It goes for almost $100 as a North American release, and there is no language barrier. And you can do this one of two ways. My console is region modded with a Switch, but you can get this pseudo Saturn cart that's got the 1MB, 4MB expansion RAM. It also allows you to play import games, and you're able to save to it as well as a backup save cart. It's $40 and unlocks the console completely, because you don't want to just collect North American games unless you really want to spend the money, because Burning Rangers is a $600 game, but if you get it for the Japanese version, it's like $60 to $70. I paid like $30 for it. Same thing with Saturn Bomberman. It's going to cost you $250 to $350 North American version, and if you look for a good price or you go on forums, you can get it for $30, $40. Same thing with Die Hard Arcade. $100 game is North American game. You can get it to $30 to $40 in Japanese variants, and that's what I highly recommend if you're going to collect for the Sega Saturn, is you look for those import experiences, because you can save a ton of money, and so many of the arcade variant games don't really have any language barrier whatsoever, so you're really just saving money. Plus, the artwork on the Japanese versions is so much better, and you're saving a ton. You can get more games for your money. The hardware itself is quite reliable. My white unit here is yellowing a tiny bit, but otherwise it still saves games with a fresh battery. The CD-ROMs load immediately. I haven't had any issues, knock on wood, keeping this alive in my collection. So should you collect for the Sega Saturn? 100%. If you've never played this before, if you're looking for something new to collect for, this is the console you should be picking up. There's still a ton of really good cheap games that you can get, especially in Japanese versions, and there's probably a lot of things you've never played before, because Sega was always experimental with the Saturn, with the Dreamcast. It seemed like when Sega was struggling, they made really interesting games, and so many other developers made great games for it too. But that's our season on the Saturn. We really hope you guys appreciated it and enjoyed it. We've got tons more videos coming up, planned and listed out all the way through spring of next year. But thanks so much for watching. Do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Leave me a question or a comment if you want to chat Saturn, but short of that, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.